It was the kind of stormy Tuesday afternoon that made the city look like a watercolor painting left out in the rain, everything smeared in grays and blues. Inside the warm, amber-lit sanctuary of the roasted bean, Clara sat across from her best friend, Sarah, swirling the dregs of her cappuccino. She was 29, successful, and entirely exhausted by the modern dating scene. After swiping left on a man holding a fish and right on a man who ghosted her within an hour, she slammed her phone onto the table. "That's it," she announced, her voice rising above the hum of the espresso machine and the jazz music. She pointed a manicured finger at the brass-handled door of the coffee shop, which was currently being battered by the wind. "I am done with apps. I am done with blind dates. I am leaving it to fate. I'm serious, Sarah. I will marry the very first man who walks through that door." Before we find out who walked through that door and how it changed Clara's life forever, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you believe in destiny, turn on those notifications so you never miss a story that might just touch your soul. Now, let's go back to that rainy afternoon, because seconds after Clara made her reckless joke, the brass bell above the door jingled violent. Sarah's eyes went wide, and Clara froze, a half-smile stuck on her face. She turned slowly, expecting perhaps a businessman in a suit or maybe, if the universe had a sense of humor, the elderly mailman. Instead, the door swung open to reveal a chaotic whirlwind of water and stress. A man stumbled in, wrestling with a broken umbrella that had turned inside out. He was soaked to the bone, wearing a faded denim jacket over a flannel shirt that had seen better days. But he wasn't alone. Clinging to his leg, wailing at the top of her lungs, was a little girl of about 5, wearing a yellow raincoat and clutching a muddy, headless doll. The man looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. He swept wet hair out of his eyes, revealing a face that was handsome but etched with worry. "I'm so sorry," he muttered to the room at large as the little girl screamed, "I want mommy." Clara's future husband wasn't a knight in shining armor, he was a drowning man. Sarah kicked Clara under the table, barely suppressing a giggle. "Well," Sarah whispered, "better start planning the wedding." But Clara didn't laugh. She watched as the man crouched down, ignoring the water dripping from his nose, and spoke softly to the girl. He didn't scold her for making a scene, he simply pulled her into a hug, heedless of the mud on her boots staining his jeans. "I know, Lily, I know," he whispered, his voice cracking just enough for Clara to hear. "I miss her too." That single sentence shattered the humor of the moment. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a harried dad, this was a man holding together a world that had fallen apart. Driven by an impulse she couldn't name, Clara stood up. She grabbed the extra napkin dispenser from her table and walked over. "Hi," she said softly. The man looked up, startled, his eyes a piercing, tragic blue. He looked ready to be kicked out. She's just having a hard day," he stammered defensively. "We'll leave." Clara shook her head, offering the napkins. "No, don't go. It's pouring out there. Here." She knelt down to the little girl's level. "Hi, I'm Clara. Is that your doll? She looks like she had an adventure in a mud puddle." The little girl, Lily, hiccuped, her wails turning into sniffles. "She's hurt," Lily whispered. "I'm a bit of a doctor for dolls," Clara lied smoothly. "If you guys sit down, maybe I can help fix her up while your dad gets a coffee." "My treat." The man, whose name was Ethan, looked at Clara as if she were an alien species. He was used to pity, and he was used to annoyance, but he wasn't used to kindness. Over the next hour, the joke was forgotten. Clara, an interior designer with a pristine schedule, sat on the floor of a coffee shop using napkins and a coffee stirrer to make a splint for a doll. She learned that Ethan was a carpenter, that he had lost his wife to cancer 2 years ago, and that he was currently failing at making a birthday cake for Lily, which was why he had run out in the storm to buy ingredients he didn't understand. Clara listened to the cadence of his voice, rough, honest, and incredibly gentle. When they finally parted ways, the rain having stopped, Ethan looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," Clara replied. She didn't get his number. She didn't ask for a date. She just watched them walk away, feeling a strange ache in her chest. Fate, however, is rarely satisfied with a single meeting. 3 weeks later, Clara was standing in the empty shell of a new storefront she had been hired to design. "The contractor is late," she muttered to herself, checking her watch. The back door creaked open, and a familiar voice called out, "I'm not late, I'm just heavily burdened." Ethan walked in, carrying a stack of lumber on one shoulder and a toolbox in the other hand. When he saw Clara, he nearly dropped the wood. The silence stretched between them, charged and electric. "The doll doctor," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, the first genuine smile she had seen on him. "The man who can't bake," she countered, grinning. Their professional relationship became the foundation of something much deeper. Over blueprints and sawdust, they talked. They talked about the architecture of grief and the design of a new life. Clara saw how hard Ethan worked, how he would rush off at 3 p.m. to pick up Lily, how his hands were rough but his heart was terrified of breaking again. But there were challenges. Ethan was guarded. He felt guilty for smiling, guilty for finding Clara attractive, guilty for wanting something for himself when Lily was still hurting. Clara, on the other hand, had to navigate the terrifying terrain of entering a pre-existing family. She wasn't just dating a man, she was auditioning for a role she wasn't sure she could play. The breaking point came 3 months later. It was Lily's birthday, the first one where Clara was invited. Clara had spent weeks agonizing over the perfect gift. She arrived at Ethan's small, cozy house with a beautifully wrapped box. The party was intimate, just family. Everything was going well until Lily opened Clara's gift. It was a locket with a picture of Lily and Ethan inside. Clara thought it was sweet. Lily, however, went rigid. "Where is Mommy?" she screamed, throwing the locket across the room. "Mommy is supposed to be in the locket." The room went deadly silent. Ethan rushed to comfort Lily, who was sobbing that Clara was trying to erase her mother. Ethan looked at Clara, his eyes filled with pain and panic. "Maybe you should go," he said. It wasn't malicious, but it was a dismissal. He chose his daughter, as he should, but it broke Clara's heart. Clara left the house in tears, feeling like an intruder who had overstepped a sacred boundary. She didn't call him for a week. She told herself the joke was on her, she had fallen for the first man who walked in, and it was a disaster. She couldn't compete with a ghost. She couldn't fix a grief she hadn't experienced. But then, she remembered the man in the rain. She remembered the way he looked at her when she fixed the doll. She realized that love wasn't about everything being perfect, it was about showing up when things were broken. She went to her workshop. She didn't text Ethan. Instead, she worked on a project for 2 days straight. On a Sunday morning, she drove back to Ethan's house. She knocked on the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ethan opened it, looking worse than he had in the coffee shop. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Clara, He started, but she held up a hand. "I'm not here to replace her, Ethan. I know I never can. But I'm not here to leave, either." She held out a wooden box she had carved herself. "This is for Lily." Ethan hesitated, then called Lily to the door. The little girl hid behind his leg, wary. Clara knelt down, just like she had that first day. "I made a mistake with the locket, Lily. I'm sorry. I found the picture of your mommy that your dad gave me a while ago, and I made this." It was a memory box, carved with intricate flowers, Lily's favorites. Inside, Clara had created a dedicated space for photos of Lily's mother, separate from everything else, treated with reverence. "This is her space," Clara said softly. "And I'm just the person who built the box to keep her safe. I'm not trying to be the picture inside." Lily stared at the box, her small fingers tracing the wood. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. Ethan watched, tears streaming down his face, realizing that Clara wasn't trying to fix them, she was building a structure where they could be safe enough to heal themselves. He realized he had been so afraid of losing the past that he was pushing away the future. 2 years later, the scene was different. The sun was shining, piercing through the stained glass of an old chapel. Sarah stood at the front, wiping away tears as the maid of honor. The doors opened, but it wasn't a man walking in this time, it was Clara, walking down the aisle. Waiting for her at the altar was Ethan, looking handsome and whole, and standing right next to him was Lily, the flower girl, holding a basket of petals and grinning missing tooth grin. In her vows, Clara took a deep breath and looked into Ethan's eyes. The guests leaned in. "Years ago," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I sat in a coffee shop and told a joke. I said I would marry the first man who walked through the door." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Ethan laughed the loudest, squeezing her hand. "I thought I was being cynical. I thought I was giving up. But the universe was listening. You walked in, soaking wet, carrying the weight of the world and a little girl who needed a friend. I didn't marry you because you were the first one. I'm marrying you because you are the only one. You taught me that love isn't a fairy tale, it's showing up in the storm." Ethan wiped a tear from his cheek and kissed her hands. They had weathered the rain, the grief, and the fear. They had built a family not out of perfection, but out of timber, trust, and resilience. As they walked out of the chapel together, a family of 3, the sky outside began to darken, and a soft rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. Clara looked up, felt a single drop of rain, and laughed. It was the perfect weather for a new beginning. Thank you for watching this story of hope and second chances. If Clara and Ethan's journey touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up, it really helps us share these stories with more people. And don't forget to subscribe, we have so many more beautiful stories waiting for you. Remember, sometimes the things we say as a joke are the prayers the universe decides to answer. See you in the next video.